Welcome to Career Tools. Today's show, we have a special one, Confidentiality with Your Bosses. One quick note before we go on, though. Nominations for the podcast awards end in just a couple days. Nominations end on October 18th at midnight. So, if you're so inclined, we'd appreciate your support. Go over to podcastawards.com and vote for Career Tools in the business category. All right, folks, here we go with today's show. Okay, there's something we got to talk about here because this comes up in conferences during the Q&A, right? So we do the conferences and then we stick around essentially till the hotel kicks us out. We get lots of questions. And one of the ones we got recently, and we received it a number of times, so I guess you finally decided we're going to get something down on a show. But
yeah, stop asking after the conference, right?
Exactly.
Here's your answer.
Exactly. We want to go home, so we're just going to answer the questions in the podcast. No. The question comes up around trusting my boss and what kind of confidentiality I can have with my boss. And sometimes it's asked in the guise of, hey, can I share something with you confidentially?
Right.
And we have some thoughts on that.
Yeah. It often comes from new managers, right? Or newer managers. They haven't yet learned some of the underpinnings that go with professional management. Their background is such. Particularly if you're younger, whether you're new or not, if you're younger, what predecessors to this relationship do you have? Well, it's family and friends, right? And if you're in the first couple of years of professional career, you think of relationships and, you trust somebody, you share, not secrets exactly, but confidential stuff, right? And so some of those folks haven't yet learned the underpinnings of professional management, which is about what the relationship is built on, based on what the rules are, so to speak. And frankly, we're thrilled to share this because this is risky, right? There's risk associated with not understanding. Once you understand the basis of it, most people go, oh, that's obvious. That's why you would then behave the way you do. But if you don't know the basis, you don't know how to behave. And people are always asking about the behavior. So we're thrilled to answer it because when people, they apply the wrong principle, and the principle comes out as my boss says I can trust him, right? And previous people in their lives said, you can trust me. And so they do. And the problem is they end up in an awkward or even worse, a professionally damaging situation.
Yeah. So let's get to the answer. And warning folks, this is an answer that you probably don't want to hear, but you have to hear it. You need to hear it.
Yeah. Yeah. So 4 points today's cast. Number 1, there is never confidentiality with any manager ever.
Unless I really trust them, right?
No, really never. Or as Kate would say, ever. There's never, ever confidentiality with any manager, no matter what. Doesn't matter how you feel or what they say or anything, never. Number 2, do not ask for it, nor expect it in any way, shape, or form. Number 3, do not assume it can be invoked, right? Because of a comment or a phrase or whatever. And number 4, lack of confidentiality, folks, is still not an indication of a lack of a trusting professional relationship. So let's not make the concept of, well, we're going to have a relationship, then therefore it should be trusting. Let's not assume therefore that we can then be confidential, because trust and confidentiality are two different things. And we'll talk about examples of that as well. But the most important thing is there's never confidentiality with any manager or executive, any leader or person who outranks you in any organization ever, period. Never.
Okay. So let's talk more about that. I mean, when you say never, there's never confidentiality with any manager. I get it. You mean like never. Right. Yeah.
It's uncontroverted, right? Our boss can never ethically provide any guarantee of any confidentiality to us. And I want to extend this. There are people who will argue, I think there are people in HR or employee relations will say, whatever you share with me will be in the strictest confidence. Even someone in employee relations, that is a falsehood. Okay. Hopefully it'll become clearer in the cast, but briefly I can say this. They cannot set aside their obligations to the organization, and blind confidentiality in advance simply cannot be done. We cannot share anything with our boss ever that we believe or we hope to keep confidential in any way, shape, or form. Now look, we're not saying that every boss will tell everything, will share everything that we tell him or her to somebody else. We're not saying bosses are loose cannons at all. It's entirely possible that something we share with them will never be mentioned to anyone ever. We're not saying everything gets shared, but really, that's not the issue in this situation. Okay, right? I think people know that inherently, that we're not saying that bosses are going to, the issue is nobody is going to expect blanket secrecy. But the question everybody has is, might my boss share something that I don't want him to share? And the answer to that is that no one can say, not even your boss, not knowing what it is. The reason our bosses can't offer us, folks, they can't offer us any hint of confidentiality is that despite any efforts we both of us are making at relationship building, and including one-on-one, folks, well, our core recommendation to being a better manager, and obviously you think, okay, one-on-ones are the exception. No, they're not an exception, right? Regardless of any of those efforts at relationship building, our boss's first responsibility, her first relationship always is with the company. If your boss promises some sort of limited confidentiality, he would be committing to something that he can't guarantee, ethically guarantee. He might be able to guarantee it, but he puts himself at enormous risk to do so. Whatever we share, our boss has to measure any secrecy he could suggest or provide against his primary responsibility to the company. Right? And look, it boils down to, if we share something with our boss that he reasonably believes he might be obligated to report on, to act on, to communicate to someone based on normal, reasonable professional standards, he can no longer maintain any confidentiality he promised us. I mean, it's as simple as that. The relationship with the company is inviolate between the manager and the company. The employee, the direct of the boss, cannot ask for the boss to set aside his or her professional obligations. It's a bit like asking for confidentiality from anyone in your chain of command at any time, or any other manager in the organization, is the equivalent of asking someone in accounting to cheat. Right? And now we suppose, right? We suppose you can ask them and they can cheat, but we're not going to suborn that. And sure, somebody can offer it, but it's unethical. It's wrong. And that's why we don't recommend you ever ask.
So that leads us right to our second point, which is, don't ask for it. Don't ask for confidentiality, nor expect it from your boss. So that being true, what does that mean for us in our careers? What does this mean?
Yeah. Now, let's be clear. There are people who are listening goes, wait, my boss has offered me confidentiality. Well, that's a bit like the CFO said, I've got a big pile of money here. I'll give you $1 billion, right? The issue is our bosses can't legitimately offer us any confidentiality, right? Right. So folks, if your boss has offered you confidentiality, we'll talk later about potential things that could happen when we ask, none of which are good. But if your boss is offered, you're walking a very fine line between risk and reward, and there's very little reward and lots of risk, because your boss literally could be trumped at a moment's notice when in fact something comes up. Now, your boss may be just not very smart, but do you want to trust somebody who's not very smart?
I mean, your boss may very well believe that she can offer you confidentiality, and may very well intend to keep her promise, right?
Yeah,
but
exactly.
Get trumped by other events.
Yeah, sure. Right? But the question really is, okay, what should we do when we're thinking we might need to ask for it? Maybe we've got a family situation. Maybe we've got a personal situation. Maybe we've got a work situation that we don't know what to do. And of course, once you share it and you can't say, well, my friend did this, or I heard a story about that, what would you recommend? Because then the cat's out of the bag, right? And so what we're hoping to do is get advice from someone, our boss, because we don't know how to proceed. But of course, the moment we share that situation, it being confidential, hoping that if it's not something that requires action, well, it'll just stay confidential. That's the problem. Because the boss doesn't know whether it's going to be confidential, he or she can't offer it. And by the way, let's go a step further. Mentors. If your mentor is in your organization, You can't ask your mentor for confidentiality. Or let me put it differently. Mentors don't offer it in any way, shape, or form. Now, if you're a mentor in another company, that's a different story because you're no longer bound by the manager company relationship, which trumps the manager direct relationship. Okay. Well, okay. But really getting back to it, what should we do when we're thinking we might ask for it? And the answer, of course, is we don't ask ever. We never ask our boss for confidentiality. Look, think about it. If you know your boss can't legitimately offer it, it really can do no good to ask for it. If you know that, you'd have to say, if you gave it to me, I know you would be doing something illegitimate or unprofessional. Look, asking for it cannot get it. It's like asking a fireman to arrest somebody for speeding or, asking the opposite, asking a police officer to put out a fire or a football player to hit a home run during a football game. You can ask all you want. It's never going to happen. Now, it could be offered. The football player, who's kicking the ball might very well say, sure, I'll hit you a home run, but it's not going to happen because confidentiality, it doesn't expire, right? I trust you never to share this with somebody else, but.
What's the harm of asking, though? I mean, in high school, I mean, what's the harm of me going and asking the head cheerleader for a date? I mean, she's never going to go out with me, but all she can say is no, right?
Yeah, there are so many dangers. We can't even count that high, but I have 4 that frankly people miss some of these. And so let's just give you just sort of around the horn a little bit. Look, if our boss knows that he can't say yes, he probably expects us to know that too, right? And look, bosses, we don't want to, we're not casting aspersion on bosses here. Mike and I both, I'm sure we forget what we didn't know and when we didn't know it. I mean, when did I learn X or Y or Z? I can't tell you. There are moments of clarity where, oh yeah, I remember that. And usually there's significant emotional events, right? If somebody puts a cigar out on the blouse of your uniform, you remember that. But if our boss knows, he probably expects us to know that too. And so one of the negatives is it makes us look selfish for asking for something that she can't possibly provide. Right? Simple as that.
Good point. Yeah, that's probably the look I got from the cheerleader that I didn't.
There you go. Yeah. Okay. I can't possibly say yes to you, of course. You're not in my social class. Yeah.
How can you possibly think?
Same situation. Our boss knows he can't say yes, right? He expects us to know that too. It makes us look professionally naive to ask for something that causes our boss to violate one of their core principles, regardless of what kind of relationship we have, right? Let me give you another one, another really good one. Our boss might mistakenly offer confidentiality. Oh my gosh, which means nothing, right? It makes us feel good, but doesn't mean anything. And then later, he or she is forced to break it. And look, we're doing a separate Manager Tools cast on just helping managers, but managers are in the minority. We admit it. We regret it, but we admit it. And so you can't trust a boss who does it. And if they do offer it and we feel all good and then we go home and discover, how did everybody else find out about this? Well, because the boss was obligated. When he went home, he thought about it. And look, once you ask your boss and your boss says, sure, I can keep it confidential. And then he hears it and goes, I'm sorry, but I can't keep that confidential. Then you're like, wait. I never would have showed you. Oh. Well, no, it's too late. Sorry. And you can't say, please. That's generally not in the book of how to have a great relationship with your boss, right? So you may get an offer of confidentiality. It means nothing. Your boss may later be forced to break it, and then everybody's in tears, right? And then think of it this way. Even if you can trust your boss, what if your boss mistakenly offers confidentiality, keeps his word because he mistakenly believes his word to you can trump his word to his company, which may have been never spoken out loud, but nonetheless exists when he takes over his responsibilities as manager, and he puts himself at risk when when someone else reveals that he knew that we had shared that with him, right? He keeps his word and then admits later, no, I actually knew about this. And they said, well, we're going to fire you and him because you had knowledge of fraud or waste or abuse that was so significant, or malfeasance or illegal activities or unethical activities or illicit activities. You just can't put your boss in the situation of sharing something like that. And we're not saying that every ask of confidentiality is all that big. You may